We're still in chapter 2 of Brueggemann's text. And Jenny, you were saying that, there was so much about Brueggemann's text that's relevant to the American Revolution. But as I read it, and this is about the third or fourth time I've read it, you should, here's my book. You can just pretty much see all of the marginal notes and everything in it. Um, it's a great book to teach with students because they actually understand it fairly well. The way Brueggemann breaks things down, and dichotomizes the alternative community of Moses with a monarchic community of Solomon, and then it's not hard to make one-to-one correspondences between this monarchic community of the 10th century and our 21st century community. And that's the way that Brueggemann would like to have it. But if you remember last time, just very quickly, we were talking about what it is that characterizes this monarchic community. And Brueggemann says there's three dimensions to it. The first of these is a community marked by affluence, in distinction and really in contrast to the community of Moses in the Sinai desert, those people wandering out of Egypt and into the land of Canaan. It was not a community of affluence by any. It was, in fact, it was one of scarcity, and the idea was very clear that they were utterly dependent upon God, dependent upon God for water, dependent upon God for food, dependent upon God for uh, just moral upkeep, just to maintain a sense of hope. Uh, but the monarchic community of Solomon undermines a lot of that. Another dimension of the monarchic community is that there is an oppressive social policy. And in order to develop the affluence that we just talked about, right, you pretty much have to create a hierarchical system where you've got a large number of workers that are fueling the economic development of the land, right? And a lot of that economic development ends up in the hands of the aristocrats. That would be Solomon, and then aristocratic community around him, including temple priests, uh, and as well as the development of a standing army. So now all of a sudden you have a very, very static structure that flies in the face, you might say, of this dependence upon a God who is free, a God who is not simply accessible through a temple, for example, or through a cultic complex, which brings us to the third dimension of the monarchic community, and that is it creates a static religion. There's an official mythology that evolves out of this. I'll talk about that in a couple minutes here. But for those of you who remember the Yahwist tradition is going to be written as kind of the official mythology of Solomon's kingdom. And the freedom of God is undermined. Now God is part of the structure that upholds this static idea of wealth and monarchical splendor. Religion becomes centralized, and the God who, in during the time of the 12 tribes, who was present to the people, now has to be mediated through the priest. And there are, whereas in the past, the Ark of the Covenant, people could go before the Ark of the Covenant. It would go to various places in the Northern Kingdom, but now it was placed in the temple, never to leave, and only the high priest could come in its presence during a particular time of the year. So God is sequestered. God has been manipulated for the purposes of the development of the kingdom. The king comes to monopolize God. Um, so the place where we left off last time is with this quote, but I think it's so central to this chapter. The obviously oppressive politics and affluent economics, obviously, oppressive politics and affluent economics depend on each other. Nevertheless, it's my contention, says Brueggemann, that fundamental to both is the religion of the captive God, in which all over-againstness is dissipated and the king and his ideology are completely at ease in the presence of God. God is no longer challenging the king. Pretty much the king has come to be the one who interprets what God wants for the country, what God wants for the nation. This God is no court of appeal for the marginal ones over against the king. For God is now completely beholden to the king. It's precisely religion that legitimates and makes possible the economics and politics that emerged. So the economics of affluence and the economics of oppression, the politics of oppression, have their source in religion. And this is the classic Marxist critique in the 19th century. Marx claiming that religion is an opiate of the people and a means by which those who hold those in the powers that be, those who hold capital are able to manipulate the workers, the laborers, to do what the capitalists want. Feeding them with visions of heaven if they're good, moral, upstanding workers. And for that reason, Marx wanted to get rid of religion completely. That's not exactly a great political ideology for someone in the church, but it is a good methodology. And this is what's so important to talk to students about, that the ideology of Marxism is, certainly has leaves much to be desired. But the methodology, the means by which the Marxist critique is carried out, typically the critique of religion, the critique of affluence, has been used by scholars ever since the time of Marx. So got a couple more people joining us. So that's where we were last time. Are there any thoughts about that before we move on?
Oh, Dan, I'd like to throw in their social science thingy uh, perspective. There are two ways, it seems to me, to view centralized authority and aristocracy. One is intentional, which Brueggemann's done a marvelous job laying out. And I wish Walter Brueggemann had a magic, wand, Harry Potter style, that he could make the world, because I would love it, if the world functioned the way Brueggemann would like us to be,
Right.
clear down in our soul and our heart. But I also see it as inevitable as a result of specialization of labor
Yeah.
and urbanization, population density combination there, that I'm not sure that there was an alternative. Hunting and gathering societies pretty much, you know, disappeared, with the invention of agriculture
Right.
10,000 years ago. And it was just, incrementally creating, you know, greater, if you will, royal consciousness. Yeah, that,
Mhm. I see what you're saying. What was I going to say? That I just had a thought in my mind and it left. Oh, darn, and it was a really good one too. But I see. Oh, I understand. I remember what it was. This is um, this is the positive dimension that Brueggemann talks about for the royal consciousness. You know, recognizing that this kind of hierarchical organization is necessary for the functioning of any society, right? Um, it all then comes back to the leadership of that society. And this is where the idea of the messianic king, the one who is an advocate for the marginalized, the one who tries to maintain this system of justice, and care for the oppressed, care for the poor, if it is present in in the attitude and in the day-to-day paradigm of the king himself, then it will trickle down into society. So the problem isn't with hierarchy, it's with the extreme manipulation that often comes with hierarchy, so that wealth flows upward and oppression flows downward. But the one person who can make that different is a righteous king, so that wealth can flow outward, and oppression can and justice can also flow outward as a result of it. That's the vision of the Messiah, right? And that's the vision that we all hope for at Christmas time. This is why Jesus is born in a manger, but the wise men still come to worship him. This is the ideal. And at one place in this chapter, Brueggemann says, I, Brueggemann, am not, so blinkered and romantic to imagine that this society can ever exist, but it's the imagination. It is the ability to conceive and to imagine and to be impassioned by that goal and that vision. That's the important thing. So anyway, Denny, please let's have a conversation about this. You're right on target. Any response? Anybody?
Somebody else want to jump in there, please?
Uh, well, the point that Brueggemann is trying to make then, and we'll have a chance to come back to this, is that with the advent of the royal consciousness, this monarchic idea where the king is God's chosen, the king represents the way of the nation, and God is sequestered in the temple. Brueggemann makes the point that the royal consciousness really performs a task of countering the counterculture. The counterculture established by Moses now has been countered by this new structure that has those three dimensions that we've talked about. The economics of equality is replaced by the economics of affluence. And I love the scriptural passages. The one thing that I don't think I do enough in this in our time together is to really look at some of the scriptural passages, but this is one of my favorite for sure, and that's at Exodus 16. And of all the ones that I picked out, I did not. Let me find it very quickly for you. Exodus 16:18. So I'll just read those starting at the paragraph. In the evening, and this, so the people are in the desert, right? They've already complained a little bit about Moses, to Moses, hey, we should go back to Egypt. At least we had something to eat there, go back to the flesh pots of Egypt. So God is looking out after the people. In the evening, quails came up and covered the camp. And in the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" In Hebrew, the term "what is it?" or the question is manna. What is it? For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded." And here's the point that Brueggemann wants to make. This is the economics of equality. Gather as much of it as each of you needs, an omer to a person according to the number of persons, all providing for those in their own tents. The Israelites did so, some gathering more, some gathering less. But when they measured it with an omer, those who gathered much had nothing over, and those who had gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed. So those who had much did not have too much. And those who had little of that which was provided by God did not have too little, right? The basic needs were met. There was an equality amongst all the people where concern for, a person's most rudimentary needs, shelter, something to eat, something to drink. We might add to that, just general health. Now, come into the 21st century, wouldn't it be nice if we had an economic system that ensured this very thing, right? Enough to eat, but not too much. Those who have much do not have too much, and those who have little do not have too little. How does that apply to us today? Well, it doesn't take, I mean, everyone in this collection right here can pretty much, if you're not thinking about it already, I'd be very surprised. I mean, think of the billionaires who have just too much, just this abstract number of of wealth, this abstract number representing their power, and it's too much. And think of those, especially this month, as SNAP benefits have been, curtailed. I think they've been reinstated, but there are so many who have little and they have too little. That's the economics of equality. Those who have much do not have too much. Those who have little do not have too little. And this, of course, I think is the foundation of Keynesian economics, right? Where the tax burden rests upon those who have a lot and maybe have a surplus. It goes into the general structure of the government and is distributed to people equally, and that generates the engines of the economy. I don't know why we're not Keynesians, but but we aren't anymore. Far from it. So, any thoughts on that?
John Maynard Keynes was a spoiled sport. Uh, he's no fun if you're really, you can't, as Brueggemann said, you can never have enough.
Yeah,
And, once you change the tax laws and make them even more regressive, uh, there you are.
yeah, yeah. A spoil sport for the rich, for sure. But this was the economic uh, mandate or the economic philosophy that was at the foundation of the civil rights movement, and with Kennedy and then later with Johnson. And the thing about it is it distributes money in the economy, and people forget about that, right? They just see people getting stuff that they, quote unquote, they don't earn. That stuff goes out their door and into the hands of the people making shoes, the people at the supermarkets, and all those kinds of things. It's a means of ensuring that money is distributed in the economy itself, and it keeps the economy alive. Uh, we're not seeing that now, and so this is the kind of thing that I think Brueggemann would want to point out, right? We're living in a society now where there are those who have much and they have too much, right? Uh, the other thing about the monarchic paradigm here, the royal consciousness, is that it replaces the politics of justice with the politics of oppression. In order to maintain and to generate this affluence, you have to oppress. Will, it looks like you have a point.
Do you think $1 trillion is too much for one individual?
I think 1 billion is too much.
Now we're talking about $1 trillion.
Yeah, it just becomes a megalomaniacal quest, doesn't it? You're talking about Elon Musk, right? Uh, there's got to be some self-image problems there that they're getting played out in the economics, you know. Um, anybody else want to jump in on that?
I think Karl Marx's, as you said, methodology is spot on for the
Yeah,
time that he was writing. Got to remember the Homestead Act came in almost exactly at the time that Karl Marx was writing his most profound works in the 1860s.
yep,
And as the Industrial Revolution took off and specialization took off, Marx is writing about a subsistence, you know, a mule and, the nuclear family and a couple of acres of ground that is a subsistence model. And
exactly. As well as upholding the ideal of craftsmanship
yes,
over, over mass production, uh,
exactly.
artistry over mechanism, all
And the
of these
Industrial
things.
Revolution, it seems to me, said, whoa, anybody that's a Marxist, is a really bad person, uh, without understanding that context in which he was writing. And I think Marx's ideas were absconded with by Rosa Luxemburg and other, with a very radical agenda,
Mhm.
um, political agenda that eventually culminated in the Bolshevik Revolution.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Is everybody okay with us recording this? Because this may be used as evidence against us in the future if things keep going
Oh,
the way.
no, just against me.
Well, no, I mean, I was talking about the importance of Marx because, I mean, we can't do the theology that we're doing. We really need to acknowledge this. We cannot do the progressive theology that we're doing without, first of all, the social scientific tools that are now being applied to these texts and to the experience that these texts reflect. But more specifically in religion, the Marxist critique, the Marxist methodology is at the source of African American theology, liberation theology, womanist theology, feminist theology, all of those things. Now, some people might think, well, the proof is in the pudding. You look at what that's given us, those darn feminists out there, right? Uh, but what it has done, it has leveled the playing field so that it's the white men alone are not the ones determining the religion. Let's go back to Solomon. The white men alone are determining, you know, the way of the nation. And the idea of experience that individuals can have of God, which limits God's freedom, right, to appeal to people in whatever surprising way, uh, that comes to be undermined. And, there's a kind of satiation that sets in, as Brueggemann says. But let's talk about the politics of oppression, because I'm so glad that Brueggemann brought up this point as well. Leviticus 25. You might remember Leviticus 25 when we read the John Dominic Crossan book on the Lord's Prayer, actually. This was a text that was written much later by it's part of the priestly tradition, probably written after the Babylonian captivity, but the ideal established in this text is, certainly has messianic overtones. The Messiah is one who would create a community like what they believed would have happened at the time of Moses, right? But the ideal of this year of Jubilee where all of the wealth would be redistributed, every 50 years, those who had, it's like the game of Monopoly. You keep Some people get a lot of money, others, have to lose some money, right? But every 50 years, that money would be redistributed. The land would go back to its original owners, and the game, if you will, would start over again. But in that context, there would be some losers, right? But they were not going to be simply left out on the street. And so the politics of justice in the alternative community reads like this in Leviticus 25, verse 35 through 42. If any of your kin fall into difficulty and become dependent on you, You shall support them. They shall live with you as though resident aliens. Do not take interest in advance or otherwise make a profit from them, but fear your God. Let them live with you. You shall not lend them your money at interest, taken in advance, or provide them food at a profit. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan to be your God. If any who are dependent on you become so impoverished that they sell themselves to you, bondage, indebted servitude, you shall not make them serve as slaves. They still have a rights otherwise. They shall remain with you as hired or bond laborers. They shall serve with you until the year of Jubilee, the one we were just talking about. Then they and their children with them shall be free from your authority. They shall go back to their own family and return to their ancestral property, for they are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as slaves or sold at all. Now remember, this is a vision that was never realized in Israel at all. Nevertheless, it is a product of the imagination that Brueggemann is talking about. The prophetic imagination envisions an ideal to which we must all aspire, to which we must all, give our passion and our commitment. So, it's always great in a capitalist society to draw on Leviticus verse 37, do not lend money. Don't take advantage of these people. I'd just like to go into all these payday lenders that charge exorbitant interest rates and then go to church on Sunday. This is right out of the book of Amos, right? That we were talking about. How you trample the head of the poor, and sell the poor for a pair of sandals. Anyway, any insights on that? Again, I hope you're not upset that this is being recorded, because this is all going to be used as evidence against us, Marxists that we are. The royal consciousness also counters the countercultural by taking the religion of God's freedom, the God who will be whatever he will be, the name Yahweh, I will be whatever I will be, and replaces it with a religion of God's accessibility. I wish Brueggemann had used a different term, because accessibility suggests something very positive, right? There was an accessibility to God when the Ark of the Covenant was taken to the various tribal communities, right? But what I think Brueggemann is trying to say here is that the religion of God's accessibility is a religion in which God can be manipulated, in which, whereas God in Genesis and in Exodus named the people, Abram became Abraham. Now in First Kings, I'm sorry, the people are naming God, right? The king is telling the people who God is and what God does to uphold the nation itself. So all of a sudden, I call this out of the frying pan into the fire, that wonderful experiment that was experienced right after the Exodus from Egypt, and in the land of Canaan, people living in 12 tribes freely, confederated, covenanted with each other, now becomes just like Egypt once again, right? Instead of Pharaoh, we have King Solomon. Instead of the cultic complex of Egypt, we have it of Israel, and so on. Any questions or comments? I hope that idea of accessibility hasn't been too confusing. But try to, whenever you hear Brueggemann say it, think of God as accessible in order for the king to be able to manipulate God, right? I know what God wants. I have access to him. That's what Solomon's saying. Um, so now the spectrum is aligned, right? On the one hand, you've got the alternative community. On the other hand, you have the royal consciousness. One of the things that makes the royal consciousness able to do what it does, injustice, oppression, affluence, manipulation of God, is that criticism is able to be silenced quite easily. And Solomon, boy, I'll tell you, this was on page 32. As I was reading this, I could not help but think of just how prescient Brueggemann was writing in 1978. First of all, he talks about, let me just read it. It's the first full paragraph, and I'm sorry to just keep reading here, but it need hardly be added that the Solomonic regime, was able to silence criticism. We know this from the story itself, right? There are two ways to silence criticism. One is the way of heavy-handed prohibition that is backed by forceful sanction, basically kill people, right? The treatment of Jeroboam in 1 Kings 11 suggests this way of handling criticism. And I want to talk about that actually in a second, which is consistent with the style of bloodbath with which the long reign began. Solomon became king by killing his brother and, killing anyone who was perceived as opposing him. That happened way, 3,000 years ago. It could never happen here, right? Silencing those who oppose you. It is curious that given the extended criticism of Ahijah, the prophet, Solomon makes no response. Indeed, the prophet is ignored. The prophet Ahijah was saying, hey, God is saying that Jeroboam is going to be the king of a new kingdom, and Solomon just ignores it, which is the second means by which you silence criticism. That's the second way of handling criticism. Develop a natural immunity and remain totally impervious to criticism. The narrator seems to present that response of cold, resistant silence and deliberate irony. The same response is evident after the strong warning of 1 Kings 9. Immediately, the narrative response at the end of 20 years in which Solomon had built 2 houses, King Solomon gave to Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. Now, here's the place that I found so interesting. The royal consciousness was completely contained, impervious to criticism. Criticism had no viable alternative ground, and did not need to be taken seriously. If Solomon had had television at his disposal, he would have managed to buy the harshest critics and make them talk show celebrities. Boom. Take the talk show celebrities and figure out ways to silence the criticism that often gets, basically take the media and make sure that you've manipulated them to silence them against you, right? That's how you become impervious to criticism. I hope people had similar thoughts when when you read that, because I couldn't help but think of Pete Hegseth. I couldn't help but think of, I'm just the whole media circus that we have with people in positions appointed by the president, Dr. Oz, Pete Hegseth, on and on and on, right? Any comments about that? Insights? Sharon, I think, Sharon, are you talking? You need to be unmuted. Oh,
There, does that work?
yes.
Great. I'd add one more, and that's flood the marketplace with things to criticize.
Oh, yeah.
So we
Yeah.
can't keep track of them. 1 or 2 new things every day.
Right. Flood the zone, as Steve Bannon says, right? That's right. Um, Well, the story of Jeroboam, I hope you don't mind me going down this rabbit hole because it's really interesting in terms of how the story of Exodus, that forms this alternative community gets written. Uh, Jeroboam was uh, really, he was working for King Solomon near the end of Solomon's reign. And Solomon was, of course, building the temple and building a wall around the city, which is metaphorically appropriate, right? If you want to maintain something. Uh, and Jeroboam was kind of the foreman that kept people working on this wall. But the the politics of affluence continued to build and build and build, so that the foreman, so that the people building the wall were essentially forced labor. They were heavily taxed, and they began to grumble. Does this sound at all familiar? I mean, forced labor, building a public project, beginning to grumble. And we're not talking Egypt here. We are talking, King Solomon's Jerusalem. So Jeroboam goes to Solomon and says, "My people are dying under the yoke of your oppression. We don't even have time to worship God because you have us working all the time, and we need a break." Well, Solomon tries to silence Jeroboam. He tries to murder him, first of all. And in the midst of this, there's a prophet associated with Shiloh, which is where the Ark of the Covenant was originally kept under Eli and Samuel. So there suggests that there's, Shiloh itself is a metaphor for the old way of doing things, where God was present to the people in a different way than God is present now. And Ahijah pretty much conspires with Jeroboam and says, "You need to take 10 of your tribes from the north, that agricultural region, and separate yourself from these two tribes of Judah and Simeon." And this is what happens. Jeroboam goes to the north, leaves Judah and Simeon, these two communities, these two tribes, to pretty much fend for themselves. Temple's built, the wall is built, but now the tax base is lost, because the real money, the people who were oppressed, are now basically they went on strike. They went, you might say, there was an exodus out of Jerusalem and out of Judah. Well, Jeroboam goes to the north and creates a capital city there called Samaria. And then he establishes two shrines because he wants to make sure that the people from the northern kingdom, Israel as it's called, do not feel that they have to go down to the temple to worship God. Now, of course, Solomon and his son Rehoboam were trying to say, no, this is the only place you can worship God. But there was a counterculture, right, that said, no, God can be worshiped anywhere. In fact, we're going to build two shrines where God can be worshiped. But lo and behold, even during Jeroboam's reign, at one of the shrines at Bethel, because of the people were an agricultural group, and they were probably very influenced by the Canaanite religion, which Baal or Baal was represented as a bull. In fact, we don't know. There might be a connection between Baal and the word bull itself. So what Jeroboam does is that at that shrine, he creates a golden calf. He creates a golden bull that serves as an idol for people to place their reverence towards. And this, of course, is written about in Second Kings and is First and Second Kings together, and is the downfall of the northern kingdom of Israel. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because the story of Exodus at this time, the year would have been 922 to about 870 or so. That 50-year period of time, the story of Exodus was not written yet. The story of Exodus had not been written. Now, Solomon had written his own story, but it didn't include the Exodus story, right? So when the people of the northern kingdom sat down and said, we're going to write the story of Exodus, isn't it interesting that all of these elements, people working under oppression, sorely oppressed in their labors, uh, experiencing an exodus from the land where they are oppressed, and eventually, coming to confederate themselves around a new understanding of who they are. Yet, in the midst of that understanding, they capitulate to the worship of idols, represented by a golden calf. So it raises the question, from an anthropological, social scientific point of view, did the Exodus story even happen, right? Did it really happen that way? Or is it a metaphor? Is it an allegory for what the people of the northern kingdom were experiencing under the oppression of Solomon? Do you see where I'm going with that? This is completely heretical to my students when I would talk to them, and of course I'd have to I'd have to endure all kinds of threats and things like that. But it does raise the question, boy, this sounds strikingly familiar to what we are told happened 250 years prior to this event, right? And so the suggestion is made that the Exodus story, Moses coming down from Mount Sinai, finding the people worshiping a golden calf, is simply an allegory for the story of Jeroboam and the people, experiencing their exodus from Jerusalem and the royal consciousness, you might say. But as we know, a new royal consciousness replaces that the ideal of the alternative community as well in Israel. So now we have two royal consciousnesses. That's the right word. And we know that the royal consciousness of the northern kingdom only lasted a matter of 200 years before they were destroyed by the Assyrians. And all that was left was the community of Judah. And what lay at the core of the community of Judah was this mythology that had at its center creation and a Messiah. And that's where Brueggemann is going to go with this. Now, I just laid out a lot of talking there. Let me stop and see if you're getting my drift, so to speak. Looks like everybody's clear. I've just turned you into social scientists who can see how you can undermine the whole idea that when we read the Bible, we're reading history. We're not reading a record of factual events that were written about in the moment, in situ, in the situation itself. We're reading interpretations of things that are believed to have happened 200 years prior, if not more, that serve particular purposes while they are being written at the time. So speaking of things that are being written at the time, and I'm just going to introduce this here. Solomon does write his own mythology because, you've got the politics of oppression, you've got affluence, and you've got, the static God, the God who's accessible. But in order to make that work for you, you have to have propaganda, right? You have to have a communication arm. You have to have a Fox News network, so to speak. I hate to say it that way because there's a lot about this propaganda that is still inherent in the Christian tradition. But it is, if I can use the term, it is propaganda all the same, giving the people a narrative into which they can place themselves and they can recognize a sense of their own identity and purpose and contribution in the larger context of their community. And this is the first strand of Old Testament literature that we have, and it's called the Yahwist tradition. So called because God is referred to exclusively in this tradition as Yahweh. Ironically, I will be whatever I will be, right? The royal consciousness is celebrating a God whose name is I will be whatever I will be. I know that's confusing because it's their countering of the counterculture seems to fly against that idea. But this is what happens. And so it comes to be the foundation of a whole narrative, a whole mythological narrative that's going to be built up around it. And unfortunately, we have 5 minutes, so I won't be able to go into it right now. But it is at the foundation of the whole prophetic literature that we appeal to during Advent, that things will be great if we can have a righteous king. Then Israel will be, excuse me, Jerusalem will be the center of the world. It will be the city on the hill. It will be the place to which all the nations will flock, and they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and nation will not rise up against nation evermore. You know, that's the ideal. So there is prophetic imagination that's happening in Judah. It just centers around a Messiah who is a part of that hierarchical monarchic structure that we talked about. It's different than the prophetic imagination that we find in the alternative community of Moses. So anyway, I think that's where I'm going to stop. I'd really like to expand on this next time. I was hoping, against hope, of course, that I could get through chapter 2 today, but there's just way too much here. And the references that Brueggemann makes, I think I've done you a disservice by not reflecting a little bit more when Brueggemann makes these references, because he can say, oh yeah, first, this is what happens in 1 Kings 11. Well, I taught Old Testament for 20 years. I know what happens in 1 Kings 11, but you probably, just the way that I don't know what happens in Plessy versus Ferguson. And if you're a lawyer, I need to have well, that's probably not the best example, but, I need to have a refresher on these things. So I want to try to draw on some of the traditions that Brueggemann is appealing to, biblical traditions. So any thoughts before we move on? Well, as always, I look forward to this. This is so much a part of who I am as a as a former professor, and it's so nice to be able to continue to teach at a level that is comparable to what I was teaching in college. In fact, a lot of what we do is very seminary oriented. So if I really appreciate your following along and, maybe indulging me in this. But it's important things. It helps us to see the world in a new way. And the more I read this book, the more I realize just how much it's influenced me. I've taught it 2 or 3 times, and each time it just is opening up a new world. You're reading it at a different place in your life, right? But boy, it couldn't get any more relevant to us right now in 2025 in the United States of America, where people are being rounded up and sent off to detention centers, and eventually will probably be used as forced labor. At least that seems to be the plan. Anyway, I hope I get to see you before next week. And if not, then we'll continue on with chapter 2, and we'll get into chapter 3, where Brueggemann really talks about the passion that is at the core of the prophetic imagination. Anybody want the last word?
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for the elm trees in my front yard, Will. They're huge. they're only about 15 years old. No, they're over 50 feet tall. It's amazing. Or maybe 40, I don't know. But anyway, thank you, everybody. And I'll see you next week.